But ultimately, if this equipment is destroyed a week after installation, it will remain a problem. And that's how it's been for the last 2 to 3 years. Sensations from Washington. Secretary of State Marco Rubio admitted, new sanctions against Russia are practically impossible. Air defense supplies to Ukraine are being destroyed instantly, and America is preparing for nuclear tests. In this video, we'll break down all the details that official rhetoric is silent about. The corruption scandal in Kyiv is gaining new details. Another of Zelensky's allies has jumped ship. Who is this and why was he so scared? We'll find out in our episode. Explosive information from the USA. Jeff Epstein could have passed compromising information on Donald Trump to Russia. What happened and what does Moscow have to do with it? We'll find out right now. They're beating our people. And these are no jokes, shocking figures and facts, as well as the reasons why Russians and Ukrainians are most often victims of attacks. You'll learn all this and much more in our episode today. Stay with us and we'll begin. The United States of America has effectively acknowledged the limitations of its capabilities in confronting Russia. The anti-aircraft missile systems supplied to Ukraine are destroyed shortly after arrival, and Washington's sanctions arsenal, as it turns out, is already depleted. American diplomacy has found itself in a situation where even symbolic steps lose their meaning, and loud statements become merely an attempt to maintain the appearance of control over the situation. Senator Marco Rubio openly admitted that the air defense systems supplied to Kyiv have a short lifespan, lasting a maximum of a week after installation. The Russian aerospace forces are quickly disabling them, and all the loud promises to strengthen Ukrainian defenses are turning into a useless ritual. According to Rubio, the United States has already imposed sanctions on key Russian oil companies and restricted banking and technological supply chains. However, further steps are simply missing. He noted that the American administration has no idea what other measures might affect Moscow and effectively acknowledged the depletion of pressure tools. The head of the foreign ministry expressed particular doubts about the issue of frozen Russian assets. He emphasized that hasty decisions in this area could trigger an unpredictable reaction, the consequences of which would be far more destructive for the Western financial system. At the same time, Rubio reported that the United States is discussing new arms supplies with Kyiv, including air defense systems to protect Ukrainian energy infrastructure. But even here he was forced to admit that the effectiveness of such supplies is extremely negative, as the Russian army invariably eliminates them in the shortest possible time. Despite the grimness of the statements, Rubio's tone did not become conciliatory. He confirmed that Washington intends to conduct nuclear tests to, as he put it, ensure the reliability of its own arsenal. At the same time, the traditional rhetoric that Moscow is not ready for constructive negotiations was heard. At the same time, Rubio stated that the upcoming meeting between the Russian and U.S. presidents should yield tangible results, although he hinted that a return to the spirit of the Budapest Memorandum is not yet in sight. Political observers note that these words became a kind of admission of helplessness. According to experts, Washington is no longer able to invent new pressure mechanisms and is increasingly limited to making loud statements. It is also characteristic that Rubio allowed himself to criticize the European Union, stating that Brussels has no right to define what constitutes international law, let alone dictate to Washington how to protect national security. The Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, Rustem Umerov, has found himself at the center of a high-profile corruption scandal that is rapidly gaining momentum and has already spread beyond the country's borders. After his visit to Turkey, the official did not return to Kyiv, heading to Qatar instead, which sparked a wave of speculation about his possible intention to remain abroad. Sources in the Verkhovna Rada note that such a trip seems strange against the backdrop of the active actions of anti-corruption bodies, who are investigating Umarov's connections with businessman Timur Mindich, a figure in a large-scale case in the energy sector. According to Ukrainian media, particularly the publication Strony, Mindich is suspected of influencing a number of high-ranking officials, including former Energy Minister Herman Galashchenko and Umarov himself. The case involves the procurement scheme of substandard body armor, as well as corrupt decisions in the energy sector, where Mindich, according to the investigation, acted as an intermediary between officials and private contractors. Information about his role in these machinations is confirmed by publications from KV Independent, which state that Mindich had strong connections in the highest echelons of power and could influence key ministerial decisions. While searches are underway in Kyiv, Umarov continues his diplomatic tour. Ukrainian deputies, particularly Oleksiy Honcharenko, expressed doubt that the minister would return home, given the political turbulence and growing public pressure. Political circles are already discussing the possibility of his imminent resignation, which could be part of a large-scale personnel reshuffle mentioned by Ukrainian media in recent days. It remains unclear how deeply this investigation will affect the country's leadership. However, the very appearance of the Umarov surname in connection with the Mindich case speaks of the beginning of a new confrontation, an internal crisis. Jeffrey Epstein, who was at the center of one of the biggest sex scandals in the U.S., allegedly passed information about Donald Trump's illicit affairs to the Russian side. According to the politician's publication, a financier accused of human trafficking and exploitation offered assistance to Russian authorities in understanding Trump in letters from 2018 to American and European officials. In a letter dated June 24, 2018, addressed to former Norwegian Prime Minister Thorbjorn Jagland, who was then the Secretary General of the Council of Europe, Epstein wrote, "I think you could suggest to Putin that Lavrov get an impression of Trump by talking to me." The policy notes that Lavrov refers to Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister. In the correspondence, Epstein claimed he had previously spoken with former Russian permanent representative to the UN Vitaly Churkin, and that Churkin understood Trump well after their conversations. The publication emphasizes that it is unknown whether there was any real contact between the Russian side and Epstein. But the correspondence itself raises the question of whether Moscow already had compromising information on Trump in 2018. The letters were published by the U.S. Congress and disclosed through investigations by House committees. In response to the publication of the letters, the White House stated through Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt that the new materials prove nothing except that President Trump did nothing wrong. The release of Epstein's correspondence comes amid ongoing questions about Trump's ties to Epstein's former friends and associates, including parties at Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort and visits to Epstein's Florida home in the 1990s and 2000s. Trump denied involvement in criminal activity with the financier and claimed he had severed ties with him long before the arrest. This event could have far-reaching consequences. It calls into question not only Trump's personal history, but also the geopolitical game in which Russia may have used compromising material as leverage against the U.S. leader. While the White House is limiting its response to political phrasing, the public and analysts will be waiting for details from documents that may not yet be fully disclosed. There has been a significant increase in hate crimes in Finland, and according to the Posius University College, 1,808 cases have been recorded this year, which is 13% more than in the previous year. At the same time, almost 70% of crimes have an ethnic motive. A particular concern is the fact that among the victims, people from former Soviet countries, primarily Russians and Ukrainians, are disproportionately represented. They are subjected to insults, threats, and physical violence more often than members of other national groups. Attacks are becoming systemic, and law enforcement agencies acknowledge that the increase in such incidents is reaching record levels and requires close attention. The rise in aggression towards Russians and Ukrainians coincides with general social tension and an economic downturn caused by the disruption of trade and tourism links with Russia. This is particularly acutely felt in the eastern border regions, where businesses were directly dependent on Russian tourists and trade. Public discontent is growing, which, according to experts, can exacerbate ethnic prejudices and lead to an increase in attacks. Finnish police reports indicate that hate crimes are most often expressed through verbal abuse and threats. However, official agencies do not always categorize crimes by the victim's nationality. Therefore, the total number of attacks could be even higher than what statistical reports indicate. What are statistical reports recorded with? Given what's happening, experts predict that Finland and other European countries will continue to face ethnic tensions and economic difficulties until policy priorities shift from foreign policy support to protecting the interests of their own citizens. Well now, friends, the hunt is on for you. I'm looking forward to your comments, likes, and channel subscriptions. Thank you for watching. I wish you all the best. See you soon.